Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I am doing my video for the celebration of A View to a Kill, the 40th year anniversary.
This man has a secret ambition.
I propose to end the domination of Silicon Valley.
A secret plan.
For which each of you will pay me $100 million.
And a secret weapon. There's only one man who can stop them.
Name is Bond. James Bond.
And I'm Dick Tracy, and you're still under arrest.
In the world of high adventure, the highest number is still 007. Roger Moore is James Bond 007 with Tanya Roberts, Grace Jones, and Christopher Walken. Has James Bond finally met his match? Find out this summer in A View to a Kill. Title song performed by Duran Duran.
I was 14 years old when this movie came out. I was very newly introduced to James Bond at all at this point. And there was a brand new Bond movie that had just come out. It's 1985 when A View to a Kill came out. I had rented it many, many times. And back then, when you rented a movie, it was on VHS, and you had to rent the VHS machine along with the movies, and you would rent a whole bunch of movies. It was a weekend thing. And rental movies were pretty new back then. They were rental stores. They were opening everywhere around this time that this movie had come out. Let's take off the helmet. All right. So, the theme song was by Duran Duran, and it was really at the peak of their popularity. One of the few Bond songs that you could actually hear on the radio, like getting normal, regular playtime, like any normal top 40 hit. This was one of the few Bond theme songs that you could just listen to on the radio, and it was a great Duran Duran song. Now, I never paid much attention to how old Roger Moore was at the time. To me, I was 14 years old. I didn't pay much attention to that. To me, he was still just James Bond. And to me, he was Bond at the time. Now, of course, many products were available for James Bond back in the 80s, the 70s and 80s. This was no different. So there were plenty of toys, plenty of products, merchandise, and that back in the 80s that had to do with Bond. In fact, I have some of that merchandise right here, and I have shared this on my channel before, were these Find Your Fate books. It was a series of 4 of them, and they were all based on A View to a Kill. So, and those were published in 1985. So that was just some of the merchandise that was available. Now, I still tend to look at A View to a Kill through the eyes of that young teenager. So that's probably why I'm not as hard on the movie as many people are, because it's definitely not one of the highest rated James Bond movies, like on Rotten Tomatoes or any of the streaming, and that it doesn't get as high of marks as a lot of the Bond movies. But there's many things that I loved about it. So I loved that we had the skiing Bond. I always liked seeing Bond on skis. And in fact, snowboarding was even introduced to many of us at the time that this was even a thing. And then of course that really cool opening with all of that going on, and then you've got um, the submarine, the iceberg submarine. That was really cool when he goes down into that. There was the robot, and the robot was pretty cool. That was those kinds of things. They were really big in the 80s, like Buck Rogers and his little robot. And computers. There were lots of talk about microchips. That was the main thing in this movie. It was all about microchips, and computers were starting to become a really big deal and really take hold back then. In fact, I remember it was back then when computers were starting to get into our schools, and we could actually start to use some of the computers in school. So it was current. The subject matter of the movie was actually very current. Now, the locations may not be as exotic throughout the movie, but they were still very pretty locations to be in. And of course, everything was filmed larger as life, or larger than life, as most Bond movies were. In fact, when I was going through some pictures of our family trip in Paris, I came across a bunch of pictures around the Eiffel Tower, and I was like, my goodness, why does that look so familiar to me? Now, I was taking those pictures, and I was not there looking for filming locations, things of that nature. This was kind of before my resurgence of being a Bond fan had come back up, and I started this channel, and but I recognized those locations in the picture, and sure enough, I've got a video on that where it's like, hey, I was at the filming locations in Paris. So that was interesting to find. Okay, now, also one of the things I liked, we had scuba diving James Bond, and I always like seeing Bond underwater. That's always a lot of fun too. So we had that in this movie. Throughout the movie, we had sneaky Bond. Because and that was actually the majority of the movie. He's sneaking around. He's there was Zorin's horse farm, laboratory, the state capitol building in San Francisco, up the Eiffel Tower, running up that. He was always sneaking around in this one. So we had lots of sneaky Bond. Infiltrating different areas, and along with the scuba diving Bond, getting to where they were pumping the oil, or the water, I should say. There were cool gadgets in this, maybe not as cool of gadgets as in some of the other movies, but so the submarine, the little robot, but Bond had in that one scene, he had the ring for taking the pictures, and the glasses where he could see through, so his glasses could see through the tint of the window. He had that reprint thing where he could he could just reprint the check that had been written so he could see what was going on with that. So he had these gadgets where he could discover hidden information with it. So those were cool at the time. He had many narrow escapes. I remember the scene with Bond when he was using that tire under the water to breathe with and get air. Now, to me, that was one of the times where Bond had something or did something that was real. Like I thought, man, if I was ever in that situation, you could actually do that. You could actually, there's air down there in the tires. So it was one of those things that I was just like, wow, Bond's using some real stuff here where he could escape and survive. Speaking of that, that's kind of one of the things of Bond movies that I have enjoyed, is it kind of makes you think of the way out, of the way to escape, of the way to survive. It makes you think about things like that. Now, I've done a lot of stupid things in my young adulthood, like Like when Bond was climbing, when he climbed up the elevator shaft to get out of the fire. I mean, I've done that. I climbed up on top of an elevator because I just wanted to see what that experience was like. And I remember going up there and getting on top of the elevator, riding it up and down as people are in there, and just to see what that experience was to be in the elevator shaft. Don't do that. Don't do that. That was very stupid of me at the time, and pretty dangerous. I didn't realize, of course, you don't realize just how many people have died in elevator shafts, even repairmen and that are trained in there. But yeah, I've probably done a lot of dumb things because I'm just like, oh, I want to kind of experience that and learned it from a Bond movie. So, but the thing is, they do make you think of ways to escape, ways to get out, ways to survive, and sometimes they're very real things you could really practically do if you needed to. But some of the things that I've learned to enjoy because of movies like this, like A View to a Kill, was I love to ski. I love being underwater, and it's because of movies like this. Okay, so now we also had an amazing villain, Christopher Walken. He didn't have a huge amount of movies under his belt at this time, but he was still pretty well known. And for some really crazy movies, like really popular movies at the time, like Deer Hunter, The Dead Zone. And then I remember we rented another one that was really weird. It was called Brainstorm, where like you could put something on your head and experience the thoughts that somebody else had. It was kind of a trippy movie. But he was the perfect Bond villain, especially to play a psychopath. I mean, he was the perfect actor for that. Even loved how he's laughing at the end. He's about ready to fall to his death, and he's like laughing. So, I mean, he played that role perfectly. Grace Jones, now, although she was not the best actor, she was still very interesting. And as far as a character in Mayday, and she had this style that was very unique. So she was cool to watch. Also, it was Lois Maxwell's last time as Moneypenny in the series. Patrick Macnee as Sir Godfrey Tibbett. And I liked watching his banter with Roger Moore back and forth. The way they came together and the way they acted in that movie was, I think you could tell that they were actually having a lot of fun being on screen together and working together. Tanya Roberts as Stacey Sutton. Now, I actually only knew her from Charlie's Angels. I wasn't old enough to have seen her other movies at this point, but I remembered her from Charlie's Angels. She was actually in the last season of Charlie's Angels. So I remembered her from that. All right. So is it the best Bond movie? No, probably not. In my opinion, anyway, it's not the best one. Do I think it's the worst? No. I don't think it's the worst. I don't even think it's bad. It's fun. It's still fun. It's also, it's very nostalgic. It's nostalgic because it's very 80s, and it's also very 80s tech. So there's a lot of nostalgia there as well for that. It was also Roger Moore's last Bond movie, and he realized he was getting too old to keep up the role at this point. So this was going to be his last outing as Bond, but he brought it. He was Bond. He really portrayed the character up to the last moment. He really did a fine job with it. So wow, 40 years ago. I cannot believe it's been that long. But I'm glad that this movie's in the collection. I'm glad that we've still got that amazing theme song from Duran Duran, which they still sing and perform in concert live to this day. They still play that song. I'm also glad because it's a piece of time that has been captured. So happy 40th anniversary of View to a Kill. Okay, well, we thank you. We'll see you in the next video. All right, bye.